Angles of elevation and depression. Angles of elevation. The angle between the line of sight and the horizontal when the observer looks upward. We still use trig functions to find the angle and side measures. So down in our picture below we can see the angle of elevation. Angle of depression is the angle between the line of sight when the observer looks downward. We still use trig functions to find the angle and side measures. So down in our picture we have our angle of depression. Solving for the angle of elevation. It's not any different from what we have been doing. A 14-foot ladder is set to scale a 13-foot wall. At what angle of elevation can the ladder reach the wall? So what we're trying to find is x. So we're trying to find that angle. So the 13 is the wall and the 14 is the ladder. We would solve this the same way we were solving for angles using trigonometry. So what trig function would we use? We're going to look down at our picture, and 13 would be the opposite of x, and 14 is the hypotenuse. So if we have opposite and hypotenuse, then we would use sine. So we're going to plug in the sine of the angle equals the opposite over the hypotenuse. Same thing we were doing the other day. So the sine of x degrees equals 13 over 14. And we're going to use our arc sine to get rid of that sine. So we're going to take the arc sine of both sides. And when we do that, the arc sine and the sine cross out on the left side. So we'll get x equals the arc sine of 13 over 14. We're going to plug that into our calculator and get x equals 68.2 degrees. Example 2. A ramp is needed to allow vehicles to climb a 2-foot wall. The angle of elevation, in order for the vehicles to safely go, must be 30 degrees or less, and the longest ramp available is 5 feet long. Can this ramp be used safely? So our first step is we're going to draw the picture. So we have our triangle, and it's a right triangle. So our 2 feet, that's our wall, and then 5 feet, that's our ramp. And then we're going to try to find the angle of elevation, which is x. So what trig function would we use? So we look at our picture, and 2 is opposite x, and 5 is the hypotenuse. So if we have opposite and hypotenuse, we would use sine. So we're going to plug in the sine of the angle equals opposite over hypotenuse. The sine of x, because that's what we're trying to find, the angle of elevation, equals 2 over 5. Multiply each side by arc sine to get rid of that sine on the left. And then those would cross out, so we would get x equals the arc sine of 2/5. Now we're going to plug that into our calculator to get x equals 23.6 degrees. So yes, the ramp would be safe since the angle is less than 30 degrees. Solving for the angle of depression. You are usually given the angle of depression, but we need one of the angles inside the triangle to use trigonometry. So let's say our angle of depression in our picture is x. The base of the triangle and the top line create parallel lines, so this means that the angle of depression would be congruent to the alternate interior angle, and that is the angle that we will use. So if we look at our little diagram over here, these two lines are parallel. So our angle of depression x is congruent to that angle because they're alternate interior angles. So now we have an angle that we can use for our trigonometry. Example 3. First, we need to find an angle inside the triangle. So if parallel lines are created, our angle of depression would be congruent to which angle? So over in our little picture, we have our 36-degree angle of depression, and since parallel lines are created, then we know that this angle is also 36 degrees. Now we can solve it. So what trig function would we use? X is our opposite side of 36 degrees, and 75 is our hypotenuse. So we would use sine because we have the opposite and hypotenuse sides. It's not always going to be sine. It could be cosine or tangent, but you always have to look and see what you have to figure out which trig function you're going to use. Example 3 continued. So we're going to plug in to the sine of the angle equals opposite over hypotenuse. So the sine of 36 degrees equals x over 75. Multiply each side by 75 to get x by itself. So we'll have 75 times the sine of 36 degrees equals x. We'll plug that into our calculator and we'll get x equals 44 feet. Example 4. The angle of depression from the top of a cliff to a point on the ground is 35 degrees, and the distance from the point to the base of the cliff is 280 feet. How tall is the cliff? So we're going to draw a picture. So we have our right triangle, and we're going to create our angle of depression, which is 35 degrees. Our distance from the point to the base of the cliff is 280 feet. So we'll put 280 down at the bottom. And we're trying to find out how tall is the cliff. So we'll put x right there. Example 4 continued. So if we have parallel sides, we know that the alternate interior angles are created. So 35 degrees down in our little picture would be congruent to this angle. So what trig function would we use? So x is opposite 35 degrees and 280 is adjacent. So if we have opposite and adjacent, we would use tangent. So we're going to plug in to the tangent of the angle equals opposite over adjacent. So the tangent of 35 degrees equals x over 280. Multiply both sides by 280 to get x by itself. So we'll have 280 times the tangent of 35 degrees equals x. We're going to plug that into our calculator and get x equals 196 feet.